Renaissance philosopher and writer Machiavelli has been quoted as saying, "I'm not interested in preserving the status quo. I want to overthrow it." The importance of respecting personal space and practicing impeccable hygiene aren't the only lessons learned from COVID-19. If anything, we've seen the incalculable value of innovative thinking because a global pandemic certainly provides enormous motivation to leave the status quo behind. That said, how do you feel about the status quo in your organization, your programming strategy, your DevOps strategy, or even your life? Where would you like to see it in, say, the next 5 years? Or as our industry and others recover from this worldwide crisis, which we all hope will be in less than 5 years? And for that matter, what's your plan for getting it there? Is the prevailing paradigm one of steady state? Do it like we've always done it. Don't rock the boat. Yeah. How is that translated into progress for your bottom line? Has COVID-19 made you see the need to adopt a more agile way of thinking? And to that point, isn't it about time to shift your paradigm so that you can do that very thing? Well, you may need to cultivate the right climate before that can happen. Are you a catalyst for change or an antagonist? You want to know what the difference is? Well, as American Baseball Hall of Famer Tommy Lasorda put it, there are three kinds of baseball players in this world: those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who wonder what happened. The catalyst makes things happen, while the antagonist just sits around and either watches or wonders, resisting change at every turn. Now, I'd much rather be the one who makes things happen, wouldn't you? My name's Joe Perez. I'm a senior systems analyst and team lead at the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm also Chief Technology Officer at Solentech Corporation. Part of my job determines how projects, data, and processes are put together, then take them all apart and figure out how to make them work more efficiently. And that largely entails dealing with a wide variety of stakeholders with differing needs and often conflicting interests, which I then have to bring together to develop, compromise, negotiate, and implement viable solutions, while all at the same time now overseeing multiple projects and making sure the appropriate resources are deployed to bring them all to completion. There's no way on earth that I can do all that while being satisfied with the status quo. You see, having dealt with people, data, students, projects, systems implementations, and pretty much everything else under the sun for more than 35 years as an IT and higher ed professional in various environments has taught me to be flexible, to expect the unexpected, to adapt to the situation, to vary my approach, to constantly keep my eyes open for the most efficient, innovative, and transformational solutions possible, and hopefully at the same time, to be the guy that makes things happen. In the 6th century BC, Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher that I believe made things happen, a real innovator, taught that the only thing permanent in life is change. We live in a constantly changing world. That seems to be most prevalent in the IT realm. We're told that even the fastest computers we can buy today might be obsolete in just a matter of months. Science textbooks are sometimes out of date by the time they're even printed. In the words of the late radical psychiatrist Ronnie Lang, we live in a moment of history where change is so speeded up that we begin to see the present only when it's already disappearing. Think about it. You know, the weather changes, personal relationships come and go, work responsibilities shift, our income fluctuates, our children grow up, our hair turns gray. Inability to cope with these and other changes invariably leads to stress, which we all know can cause a whole host of emotional and physical problems. Now, think about the stress that has come as a result of massive changes to our society from COVID-19 in a relatively short period of time. You remember these from last year, the stay-at-home orders, the social distancing, shifting to a remote work environment, the temporary shortages we had for goods, virtual schooling of kids, virtual doctor's appointment, virtual conferences like this one. I mean, what's next? Virtual dating? Wait a minute. eHarmony's been around for a long time, hasn't it? Seriously, medical research tells us that acute stress is a good thing, as it wakes up both our brains and our bodies for action and enhances our performance in danger. You already know about this. It's that whole fight or flight thing, right? But by contrast, chronic stress is not so good, as there's a greater reactivity and slower recovery of the stress response. Now, that means that the stress response is triggered more and more easily in response to lower and lower levels of stress and takes longer and longer to revert back to a normal state. The result is major strain to both the brain and body that can lead to symptoms of both mental and physical illness. In a study published by the academic journal, theconversation.com, Canadian professor of kinesiology Jennifer Heights of McMaster University wrote, an unfortunate side effect of the COVID-19 pandemic has been its impact on psychological distress and mental health. Psychological stress, such as conflict with a family member, activates the stress response in the same way as a physical threat. Now, I hate to tell you this, but pandemic or no pandemic, as we continue through the 21st century, it'll only get worse. The pace will only quicken. Irish author George Bernard Shaw once said, progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. In a May 2020 Forbes article entitled 6 Ways that COVID-19 Will Change the Workplace Forever, speaker and author William Marotta wrote, the coronavirus will permanently alter many elements of how we work, as it is global, enduring, pervasively disruptive, and impossible to ignore. And you thought 9/11 was disruptive? No. A year down the road, even now, change is here to stay, even after that long-awaited day arrives when this virus is conquered. So what am I going to do? How do I deal with all this? Can I ignore change altogether and hope to goodness that things will stay as they are? Or should I be cultivating a climate for paradigm shift? How can I move forward without sacrificing both quality and security in the process? I would like to suggest a three-pronged approach to help strike that delicate balance for you as an innovator. I don't care if you're a developer, a DBA, an IT manager, a data scientist, a DevOps professional, or anything else. If you're going to survive in a post-COVID-19 world, you must be an innovator. Okay? For you as an innovator to go the extra mile, break out of your comfort zone, and simply blow away the status quo. Here are 3 key words for you to remember. The first word is recognize. I must be able to identify and categorize changes that come my way. I must understand the nature of changes. Second word, resolve. There's both a passive and an active aspect to this concept that we'll touch on in just a few minutes. And the third word is respond. What am I going to do with the knowledge that I've gained? What's my takeaway? I plan to show you 3 practical suggestions when we get to that point. Ronald Pitzer, family sociologist at the University of Minnesota, once quoted a wise college student as saying, "For how I am, shame on my parents. If I stay that way, shame on me." Now, okay, that might be a little bit of an oversimplification, but there's still plenty of truth to it. Although we can argue that we are the product of our own environment, it's up to us to refuse to be controlled by our circumstances, rise to the challenges before us, and say, I am not just a puppet on a string. I will not be an antagonist to change. I will be a catalyst for change and thereby facilitate innovation. Well, let's jump right in. The first word is recognize. There are 3 characteristics of change that I need to recognize. The first of which is that change is inevitable. So you can't avoid it. We say change is good. We also say change is bad. Well, come on, man, make up your mind. Which one is it? Well, it's neither. And some would say it's both. Seriously. I mean, it's a matter of perception, right? That depends upon how we react and whether or not we're willing to accept changes. You see, sometimes we can't do anything about a change that's been imposed upon us, like with the coronavirus, right? And that's even though millions have already been vaccinated, whereas other changes are of our own making. But in either case, why do we tend to dislike being forced to deal with change? Well, let me suggest 2 likely reasons. First of all, fear of the unknown. That's definitely a motivating factor. I mean, we all have our own little comfort zones in which we'd like to stay, right? A Cuban man I knew very well broke out of his comfort zone when he decided to come to America with his family in the late 1950s, leaving a prosperous business and everything else behind. He was able to make a new life for his family. And while it took him an enormous amount of effort, struggle, and hardship to get there, they were all so much better off because of it. Now, I, for one, am glad that this man did this. For I was born soon thereafter in America and not in Cuba under communism. You see, that man, as I'm sure you might have guessed by now, was my father. And he did not let fear of the unknown defeat him. He was a true innovator. Secondly, fear of loss because of the unknown. Okay. It implies the possibility of failure. See, if I am to effectively deal with change, I must recognize that it's an inevitable part of my human existence. I must face up to that fact. And if I experience what some would consider a failure, I should look upon it as a temporary reversal designed to keep me humble and give me an opportunity to learn from it, thereby avoiding the same trap in the future. The Gartner and Forrester groups have estimated that more than half of all major IT projects fail. And unfortunately, innovators are the ones that most often bear the brunt of the blame for it. When they take it personally, they may end up failing as well. With the inability to either adapt to change or to push it at the right pace being listed as the major reasons for these failures. And that's according to a recent Harvard Business Review study. Blindly sticking with the status quo can kill your DevOps growth with stagnation. And mediocrity breeds stagnation. Hey, if you didn't already know that before COVID-19, you certainly know it now. Charles F. Kettering, another innovator. He's the man who invented the first electrical ignition system and the first self-starter for automobile engines and the first practical engine-driven generator. Listen to what he said. The world hates change, yet it is the only thing that has brought progress. He then went on to say this: my interest is in the future because I am going to spend the rest of my life there. So the problem is not really my fears, nor my future, nor even my fears about my future, right? But how I'm going to react to them. That is, will I let them beat me down to the feet, or will I master them and learn something that will make me a better person and help facilitate innovation? More on that a little later. Yes, change is inevitable, but it's also inexorable. So why resist it? After all, resistance is futile. Or so the Borg would have us to believe. Hey, folks, you can't stop change any more than you can stop the Earth from rotating. Picture this. I'm standing on the side of a mountain and I see an avalanche coming right at me, just like these guys in the picture here. 600,000 tons of snow and debris rocketing toward my position at more than 80 miles an hour. Now, am I somehow going to stop that massive behemoth with my bare hands or something? No, I'd better get out of the way, or some polar bear is going to have himself a Cuban popsicle for dessert tomorrow night. Hey, sometimes the changes we experience are subtle. Other times, they're drastic. Let me illustrate. Have any of you ever been on a roller coaster? They're fun, they're exciting, and they're dreadful, all at the same time. Perhaps more dreadful than fun if you're prone to motion sickness. Okay. But as for me, oh man, an amusement park called Busch Gardens in Williamsburg, Virginia, in America. There's one called Apollo's Chariot. Man, what a rush. After an initial bone jarring drop of more than 200 feet, you feel like you're about to break the sound barrier in a roller coaster. But in reality, you can probably be going faster than that legally on an Autobahn or something, right? Did you know that right this second, although you're sitting still in your seat or standing, whatever, you're actually moving at more than 1,000 miles an hour? Yeah, that's the approximate speed of the Earth's rotation at the equator. But you can't feel it. I mean, that's some serious paradigm shifting going on, yet totally imperceptible. Now, speaking of perception, think about what time it was when I first started speaking. And while just a few minutes have gone by since then, and it's a different time now, it's still the same day now. Now, what does that tell you? Well, it tells me that out of the same mouth I can say, time has changed and time has not changed, and not even bear the slightest resemblance to the average politician. Okay, hey, look, it's all a matter of perception, right? Subtle or drastic, internal or external, positive or negative, folks, change is inexorable. Benjamin Disraeli, British Prime Minister in the late 1800s, once said, change is as inexorable as time, yet nothing meets with more resistance. And those who do resist, well, they're the antagonists I was referring to. Well, not only is change inevitable and inexorable, but change can also be inspiring. I alluded to this in the last couple of slides, but here again, it is neither good nor bad. It's what I make of it. See, change forces me to break out of my comfort zone. Hey, it's not healthy to stay in a rut. As someone once said, that a rut is nothing more than a grave with both ends knocked out of it. By contrast, we were built to change, to grow, to learn, to improve, to innovate. When I deal with change, I recognize that my goals and expectations must be set higher. Years ago, I used to be single. And as a bachelor in college, I had certain expectations of laundry and cleanliness. Well, maybe more accurately, the lack thereof. Well, then I graduated and then I got married, as you see. Okay. And boy, was that a change. I mean, those expectations of cleanliness went right out the window. But seriously, though, I mean, some men might argue that when they get married, it's a change for the worse, saying, oh, he gives up his freedom. He needs to be nicer and neater. He cannot eat off the same plate for a whole week. Still, Come on, it's not supposed to be a change for the worst. I mean, it certainly wasn't for me. You know, besides the salvation of my soul, the best gift God ever gave me was my wife. And I can still say that after being married for almost 37 years to the love of my life. Oh, yeah, I've got it bad. No, actually, I've got it good. The benefits have been incalculable. Companionship, support, camaraderie, unconditional love, the list goes on and on and on. See, it's all a matter of perception. Now, in the IT world where you and I work, perception and reality is that change and innovation has brought nearly unimaginable benefits to the general public, even to those relatively few people who don't own a computer themselves. In the early days of room-sized machines and vacuum tubes, who would have dreamed that the information technology explosion and resulting innovation would be so widespread? In fact, here's a prediction that fell flat on its face. I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. Guess who said that? Thomas Watson? Really? Yeah. So, in cultivating a climate for paradigm shift, we see that the first word is recognize. And we recognize that change is inevitable, inexorable, and inspiring. Now, do you remember what the second word was? Resolve. Webster defines resolve as a fixed, unmovable purpose of mind, a settled determination. Now, in my resolve, I must exhibit and balance 2 seemingly opposite qualities. The first of these is deference, or respectful submission. Now, how do I show this quality? Well, first of all, I need to make the most of whatever benefits that change can bring to me, submitting myself to the realization that there is some higher purpose to be fulfilled here. Let me illustrate. Suppose I had 5 pounds of steel and I wanted to make the best use of it. Well, if I form it into a plain bar, it's worth about $5 US. Make it into a pair of premium horseshoes, the value goes up to $40. Extrude it into surgical needles, more than $1,500. But fashion that 5-pound piece of steel into precision watch springs, and that same $5 lump is now worth a cool $250,000. So, although changing that nearly worthless lump into precision watch springs would take an enormous amount of effort, it's well worth the inconvenience, or you can really capitalize on the benefits. Hey, the same principle holds true when considering changes. Often a great deal of trouble, but well worth the investment if I learn to capitalize on the benefits. Secondly, I need to focus more on behavior than belief. For example, let's say I made some New Year's resolutions to spend more time with my wife and children, to lose weight, be more organized at work, read more books, keep a tidier house. Okay. Is there anyone in this virtual conference who believes that any of those things are not worthy goals? Well, of course not. I see you shaking your heads. No, I'm teasing. I cannot see you shaking your heads. No acting. Okay. Look, these things are common sense. So you could say that I hold to these. My beliefs are in the right place, right? But as commendable as those beliefs may be, if they don't produce a change in my behavior, I won't ever fulfill those resolutions. For instance, my belief says I want to lose 10 pounds, but my behavior says I want to stuff my face with cake, right? Guess what? If that behavior wins out over the belief, I'm definitely not going to lose 10 pounds. I might even gain 10 pounds. So you see, the farther and farther apart my behavior is from my beliefs, the more difficult it'll be to reconcile the two. And eventually, the resulting stress becomes so unbearable that one or the other will break. My behavior must back up my beliefs. My walk must match my talk if I am to cultivate a climate for paradigm shift and thereby facilitate innovation. Thirdly, I need to be fluid rather than rigid, like water flowing around an outcropping of rock in a fast moving stream. See, if I'm fluid in the face of change, especially those that are beyond my control, yeah, I don't know, like the coronavirus, right? I'll be flexible and better able to navigate and deal with the obstacles that change often brings. But if I stubbornly resist change and remain rigid, having forgotten that change is inevitable and inexorable, right? Okay, I'm going to be more like a piece of inflexible driftwood approaching that same outcropping of rock now, but this time more likely to be dashed to pieces. Now, doing that is what's called being an antagonist rather than a catalyst. Tech Republic, with regards to being fluid, reported last June that more than 9 out of every 10 leaders across the globe said that they'd been forced to shift their cloud strategies to operate in the new normal now brought on by the effects of COVID-19. As a phenomenal increase in remote workers placed increasingly higher and higher demands on these services. All the more reason to be fluid rather than rigid. It shouldn't take a global pandemic for us to see that. Nigel Williams, international performance improvement coach from Australia, once said, if the rate of change outside yourself is greater than the rate of change inside yourself, then the end is in sight. So, to achieve the right balance in my resolve, I need to temper my deference with determination. Dealing with change is more than simply throwing up my hands fatalistically and saying, que sera. Okay, sure. I must learn to go with the flow, as it were, and be fluid, like we talked about. But there's a personal responsibility here that I simply cannot ignore. Now, that being said, Alan Calarco, co-author of Adaptability, Responding Effectively to Change, has studied the process of dealing with change and transition. And to improve one's response to change, he suggests practicing with determination and resolve 3 types of flexibility: cognitive, emotional, and dispositional. First of all, innovators who have cognitive flexibility are able to incorporate different ways of thinking into the way they plan, make decisions, and manage their work on a daily basis. They can envision multiple scenarios and can see when to inject a change and shift the paradigm. See, these leaders more readily learn from their experiences and recognize when old approaches just don't work. Secondly, innovators with emotional flexibility will vary their approach to dealing with their own and others' emotions. Now, that's an area that I believe many in leadership often fail to consider. An emotionally flexible leader is comfortable with the process of transition. Adapting to change requires some level of give and take between the leader and those experiencing the change. It's all about listening without dismissing their concerns. And thirdly, innovators who show dispositional flexibility. Well, these are the ones who are going to maintain an optimistic mindset, yet they're still grounded in openness and realism. Oh, they'll acknowledge a bad situation while at the same time visualizing a better future.
They are neither blindly positive nor bitterly pessimistic.
Let's see, that type of innovative mindset may just have been a contributing factor to the speed at which coronavirus vaccines have been developed. In reality, that's also how innovators and other leaders who are able to embrace all three of these characteristics will cultivate a climate for paradigm shift. Why? Because they see change as an opportunity, not a threat. So, by determining to learn and practice behaviors that boost your cognitive, emotional, and dispositional flexibility, you can become more adaptable and in turn help others to adapt as well. See, that takes determination, and it's all a part of being a catalyst for change rather than an antagonist, or facilitating innovation rather than frustrating it. So, what if I can't balance deference and determination? What if I don't face the changes in my life with an iron resolve? Well, quite often, it'll result in a tragic fall, a downward spiral. I call these the 5 dangerous D's. It starts off when I begin denying that there's a problem or a need for a change at all. And then I start doubting my ability to cope with the change. I lose my resolve. This leads to distress, which Webster defines as extreme pain or anguish of body or mind. Now, if I don't deal with distress, I lose heart. And that's exactly what despair means: losing heart, giving up all expectation of hope, being in a hopeless state of dread. And from that bleak vantage point, what's the only possible result? Number 5, defeat. No way I can win now. I might as well give up. Nothing's the same anymore. These changes are just too much for me to handle. There will be no paradigm shift, no innovation, nothing. Why? Because I have been defeated. Man, not a pretty picture at all, is it? I mean, it's like you're being crushed under the weight of an unmovable burden, even if it's only made out of paper. Is there a way out of this? Oh, yeah, there is. Recognize, resolve, and do you remember the third word? The third word is respond. How should I respond? Let me suggest 3 ways or 3 looks. First of all, an inward look. How so? Embrace the change. Don't shy away from it. Don't just sit there with a wrinkled up nose thinking, well, I'm not going to accept this change. That's the way I've always done things, and that's the way I'll keep on doing it. Nobody's going to change my mind. Hey, remember, change is not the enemy here, folks. It's an opportunity, not a threat. Consider this. The standard railroad gauge in the United States, that's the distance between the rails, is 4 feet, 8 1/2 inches. Why such an odd number? Well, because that's the way they built them in England. And some of the first American railroads were built by British expatriates. Okay, so why did the British adopt that particular gauge? Because the people who built the pre-railroad tramways used that gauge. They in turn were locked into that gauge because the people who built the tramways used the same standards and tools they had used for building wagons, which were also set on a gauge of 4 feet, 8 1/2 inches. Okay, well then why were the wagons built to that scale? Because with any other size, well, then the wheels will not match the old wheel ruts on the roads. Okay, then. So who built these old rutted roads? The first long distance highways in Europe were built by Imperial Rome for the benefit of their legions. Many of these roads have been in use ever since. They've been paved over, but still used. The ruts were first made by Roman war chariots. 4 feet, 8 1/2 inches was the width a chariot needed to be to accommodate, wait for it, the rear ends of 2 war horses. Maybe the reason of, well, that's the way we've always done it. is not the great excuse that some people believe it to be. And here you didn't think a horse's rear end was that important, huh? But then again, how would you like to be known? As the horse's rear end that was an antagonist to change, who couldn't break out of their comfort zone, who was satisfied with the status quo, who would never get out of the rut. We're talking paradigm shift here, folks. We need to start asking the right questions. Rather than why, ask what new opportunities will this provide? Instead of how will this affect me, ask what problems will this solve? And then don't ask, when can I get this over with? Instead, ask, what can I do to help someone else? Look for an innovative solution, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, I am a firm believer that if you're not innovating, you are stagnating. Ben Diamond, former CEO at salesconcepts.com, wrote an interesting article years ago on handling change. He said that the most effective way to deal with change is to change yourself, particularly your thinking processes. Hey, there's nothing like COVID-19 to drive change in our thinking processes. That's the inward look. Secondly, an upward look. Earlier in this presentation, I mentioned that some changes are of our own making, while others are imposed upon us without our knowledge or consent, or due to circumstances beyond our control. Often we can look within ourselves and find the inner strength and resolve to deal with the changes and come out on top. That's acknowledgement. However, sometimes I find myself in situations that are beyond my ability to handle. Those are times that an inward look just isn't enough. I need to look beyond myself to find the empowerment I need to cope with change. Now, I know this is not a religious gathering, and I'm certainly not preaching a sermon, so please don't misunderstand me. But I was asked to share my views. And quite frankly, I find it impossible for me to do that without at least some reference to the power of faith. That's dependence. Nevertheless, so as not to offend anyone, and that's the last thing I'd ever want to do. Let's leave religion totally out of this and look at it from just a practical standpoint. There will come a time in every person's life that they'll come to the end of themselves. Where else can they go? Now, I don't think it's unreasonable to acknowledge the existence of someone, or if you prefer, something outside of ourselves on which we feel we need to depend upon. Now, whether your deity is known as Allah, Jehovah, God, Buddha, or by some other name, or if you believe in multiple deities or no deities, or if you prefer to believe in an impersonal, invisible force, hey, that's totally up to you. I mean, what else can you do when faced with a change that's too big to handle on your own? Now, you can make your own choice, but as for me, I choose to put my faith in the
one whose strength
has never failed me, who changed my life from the inside out, and who's working all things together for good. Only when I come to that realization can I have the confidence that my life will go on and that some good will come from this mess called change. In the words of Reinhold Niebuhr, who wrote the sentence commonly known as the Serenity Prayer, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
America's founding fathers acknowledged the role of providence and their need
To depend upon somebody greater than all for the wisdom, strength, and protection they needed to face the major changes they were undergoing when the United States of America was being formed. I don't think anyone could have said it any better than colonial American statesman Benjamin Franklin when he asked this rhetorical question: if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, Is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? Okay, enough about that. So, what's our response? Well, we've embraced change with an inward look. We've been empowered to cope with an upward look. Now it's time to encourage others with, what do you think? An outward look. So, how do I go about doing this? How do I cultivate a climate for paradigm shift? I suggest 3 ways. First of all, passing on what I've learned. That's mentoring. As an innovator, people look up to you. So share with them. Look for those teachable moments to involve them in business processes, in your coding, in your best practices for DevOps. Secondly, make the most of the situation. That's maximizing. That's the life lesson that's been pounded into many of us since we were children, remember? Those who don't learn from their mistakes are doomed to repeat them. Thirdly, someone else will also benefit. That's motivating. Success is in everyone's best interest. And as a DevOps professional, you want to succeed. If you're a manager, you want your company, and your staff to succeed. See, these 3 ideas of mentoring, maximizing, and motivating are going to drive an innovative mindset, both personally and corporately as well. You remember when I said earlier about innovation? Well, I'm equally convinced that innovation leads to collaboration. In the COVID-19 crisis over the last year or so, we've definitely seen this collaborative spirit among many companies who responded to change with their own outward look by pivoting the focus of their manufacturing. Maya Kumar, entrepreneurship professor at IE University, cited several examples of this in a May 2020 article. First of all, LVMH, the luxury goods company, converted its perfume factory to produce hand sanitizer for France's healthcare centers. And then there's Foxconn, the Taiwanese electronics giant, who shifted resources from making iPhones to making face masks. And there were fashion designers that temporarily pivoted from evening gowns to medical gowns. And then some car manufacturers. Remember, they worked with governments to make ventilators to meet the need at the time. Kumar went on to say, not only am I optimistic that this challenging time will pass, I believe it suggests that we as a society have the attitudes and mindsets to tackle significant challenges. Hopefully, we can continue to drive innovation for our collective well-being long after this crisis is over. So, when you are mentoring, maximizing, and motivating, you should set high expectations. I mean, there's a reason you do that, right? Because nobody wants to be average. You know what an average is, don't you? An average is the best of the worst and the worst of the best. Who wants that? Nope, not me. Yeah, because that's all part of being an antagonist and not a catalyst. To that point, here's another Ben Franklin nugget. Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn. Now, that said, let's encourage others and involve them in the outward look by mentoring, maximizing, and motivating. American President John Quincy Adams has been quoted as saying, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. And to that, I'll add, you will also be an innovator. Okay, we've come to the end now. So let's review the 3-pronged approach I've given you. Remember the first word, it's recognize. We need to recognize that change is inevitable, inexorable, and inspiring. Remember the second word, resolve. I must resolve to balance my deference with determination. You remember the third word, The third word is respond. We need to respond with an inward embracing, an upward empowering, and an outward encouraging. Dale Carnegie, author of How to Win Friends and Influence People, once said, keep your mind open to change all the time. Welcome it, court it. It is only by examining and re-examining your opinions and ideas that you can progress. Look, you can either be a catalyst for change or an antagonist that resists it at every turn, even when you don't realize it. As a DevOps professional, as an innovator, as one who hopes for and works towards the day in which we will emerge from this global pandemic, you are in a unique position to either make things happen or stand by, sit back, and watch them happen to you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not be satisfied with the status quo. Like Machiavelli said, let's overthrow it and thereby cultivate a climate for paradigm shift and thereby facilitate innovation in a post-COVID-19 world. Be a catalyst for change, not an antagonist. Thanks so much for your time.